Let's take a trip back in time to the early 1990s. You walk into a dimly lit room full of neon lights that glow bright blues, reds, and greens. And everywhere you turn, there's the electronic symphony of bleeps, boops, and shouting kids. Obviously, this was an arcade, but it wasn't just a place to play games. It was a cultural hotspot, a meeting place for kids, teens, and even adults who wanted to escape for a few hours. Friends would gather after school or on weekends, groups crowded around machines, cheering or groaning at every close match, and the sounds of coins dropped into slots was like music to the arcade owner's ears. It meant business was good. But beyond that, the arcade was a place where you could prove yourself. Winning in fighting games meant respect. Losing meant you were a scrub, but it didn't mean you couldn't improve. And in the center of all this action were fighting games. Nothing defined the arcade scene in the early 90s quite like them. In 1991, Capcom unleashed Street Fighter II, and everything changed overnight. It was simple enough for anyone to pick up, but deep enough to keep people playing for hours. Players chose from colorful, memorable characters, from Ryu and Ken to Chun-Li and Guile, each with unique fighting styles, and it made special moves and combos essential. Players practiced dragon punches and fireballs until their wrists hurt. So it wasn't just a game, it was a worldwide sensation. And it kept the arcades packed, for a while at least. Kids skipped lunch to save quarters, rivalries started, some friendly and some heated. And you had your spectators who watched older players become a lesson in itself. People would lean over the machine studying every move, waiting for their turn to play. And by 1993, Street Fighter II had earned over $1 billion in quarters. Imagine that. Entire buckets of coins being emptied into these machines every day, all over the world. Capcom knew they had something special, but they didn't stop there. They released new versions, each one promising something better. You had Champion Edition, which let players finally choose the powerful boss characters. Hyper Fighting Edition, that ramped up the speed, making matches even more tense. You had Super Street Fighter II, which added new characters like Cammy, T-Hawk, Fei Long, and DJ, expanding the roster and strategies. And then the creme de la creme, you had Super Turbo 2, which introduced super combos, flashy moves that could turn the tide of a fight. And for die-hard fans, these new versions were amazing. They'd line up to try the latest update, learning every new trick, but not everyone was impressed. Some players felt like it was just more of the same, and things started to get a little stale. And also to couple that, Capcom wasn't alone anymore. Their rivals were watching and innovating. You had SNK launching Fatal Fury and King of Fighters, introducing new team battles and deep mechanics that rewarded strategy. You had Midway that shocked everyone with Mortal Kombat. It was a bloody, gory, and controversial game, and kids loved it. Adults loved it. People crowded around just to see the gruesome fatalities. And even Sega pushed technology further with Virtua Fighter, the first major 3D fighting game. Instead of flat cartoon-like sprites, you saw the real 3D models moving smoothly in space. So the competition was fierce. Players had more choices than ever. Arcades had to keep up with the hottest new games or risk empty floors. And the fighting game scene was evolving fast. So with all this happening, Capcom knew they just couldn't keep recycling the same game. They needed something bold, something next gen, something that would prove they were still king of the arcades. So the stage was set for a new era in fighting games, and Capcom was about to make its move. This is the story of Street Fighter Alpha: Warrior's Dreams. So in the early 1990s, Capcom, like we said, was on top of the world. Street Fighter II was a gigantic hit. Arcades were packed with kids and teenagers and adults, pumping in quarters just to see who could throw the best Hadouken or pull off the most brutal combos. But success brought a new problem. How do you keep it going? People loved Street Fighter II, but they were starting to get tired of playing the same game over and over. Capcom had released updated versions like Champion, Turbo, and Super, each with small changes or new characters, but the players wanted something truly new. Inside of Capcom's offices in Japan, there were heated meetings. Producers and designers debated the future of the series. One idea at the time was to jump straight to Street Fighter III, but that was a scary choice. Making a true sequel would cost a lot of money. It could take years to develop and finish, and what if players just didn't like it? Capcom couldn't afford to rush Street Fighter III and ruin its reputation. So a group of Capcom leaders, including the producer Noritaka Funamisu and legendary designer Akira Yasuda, also known as Akiman, came up with a clever plan. Instead of moving forward, they would tell an origin story. What happened before Street Fighter II? Ryu and Ken would be less experienced and more raw. Chun-Li would be on her first mission, and they'd all have a cooler look with a fresh style. And also they played with the ideas of bringing in new characters. They didn't want just old faces, they would invent new fighters with unique moves and personalities to shake things up. And also they had cutting edge new technology. The new CPS2 arcade system was much more powerful, This meant better animation, sharper graphics, and crystal clear sound. They wanted it to look and feel like you were playing a high-energy anime movie. They also aimed to make it stylish and exciting. They didn't just want fights, they wanted drama, big, colorful special moves, dramatic rivalries, and even the music would be more cinematic as well. In Japan, they thought this ambitious new project, Street Fighter Zero at the time, the word zero hinted at going back to the start, before the events of Street Fighter 2. So in Japan, they kept the title Street Fighter Zero. In the West, Capcom thought the name might confuse people, so they called it Street Fighter Alpha, Warrior's Dreams. Alpha sounded cool and modern at the time, and Warrior's Dreams hinted at a dramatic, character-driven story they wanted to tell. For Capcom, this wasn't just another cash-in sequel, it was a chance to reimagine Street Fighter. They wanted to prove that the series could keep growing, keep surprising players, and stay ahead of the competition in the crowded world of arcade games. So if you didn't know already, Street Fighter Alpha was definitely based on an anime movie they had in Japan. It was called Street Fighter 2, the movie, but not like Street Fighter the movie. Please don't get the two confused. One is amazing, and the other one is amazingly so bad that it became amazing later on. But talking about the anime, I saw this back when I was like, this came out around the time I was in the military, like 1995 time frame. So it was a store on my post called Fantasy Star Central, and I hope they're still around because that place had like at the time, international games were a big deal. Like if you had a PlayStation or something like that, or a Sega Saturn, to play Japanese imports was huge, and this place carried a lot of the Japanese imports. They also had dubbed anime at the time on VHS. If you don't know what VHS is, I'm sure you know what VHS is, but video cassette where you'd rent it and whatnot, and then you take it home and dub it, and then you'd have a crappier copy than the one you rented. But anyway, I ended up getting Street Fighter 2, the movie. I saw it there, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. So I ended up renting it, and it blew me away. I mean, this could be a big risk too, because anime adaptations at the time were terrible. They were god awful. But this one actually was true to how I imagined Street Fighter to play and Street Fighter to be. I mean, it was and if you ever watch the movies, watch the Japanese one. I know it's up for debate, but for me, the American version was god awful. The Japanese version, the music is much better, and the characters are more stoic. In the American version, it's just, and I know that was a lot of people's first interaction with this movie, but to me, horrifying. Watch the Japanese one dubbed. You can thank me later. But a lot of the throwbacks in that movie, a lot of things that happen in that anime is translated over into Street Fighter Alpha. So that was some of the basis and foundation of some of the events that happened in Street Fighter Alpha Arcade. So just to know that, I'm sure you already knew that though. So when Street Fighter Alpha arrived in arcades, it wasn't just another fighting game, and definitely had more to offer than punching, kicking, and flashy combos. This game had something new to offer, a real story this time around. Capcom, the company behind the series, wanted to do more than update the gameplay. They wanted to go back in time to tell the events that happened before the famous Street Fighter 2. It was like going back to see how your favorite heroes and villains became who they are. Imagine reading a book series and know it back and forth, and then getting to read a special volume that explains the characters' childhoods, their fears, and their motivations. That's exactly what Street Fighter Alpha did for its fans. We'll start with Ryu, the young warrior with a dark secret. Now Ryu in this game wasn't the calm, wise fighter players knew him from in Street Fighter 2. In Alpha, he was younger and less experienced, and he was still learning what it meant to be a true martial artist. But Ryu had a dark side. Inside him lurked the Satsu no Hado, an evil energy that tempts him to kill his opponents without mercy. It was like a shadow following him everywhere, whispering terrible things. And this would come to play later on down the line in the Street Fighter series. Players just didn't see him as a hero, they saw him as someone fighting against himself. It gave players a new way to understand his quiet, serious personality in later games. Next up, we got Ken, the confident rival. Now Ken Masters was Ryu's best friend. They trained together in Japan, and also if you watch the anime, it goes deeper into their story. But Ryu is definitely his biggest rival. And in Alpha, Ken was even cockier than in Street Fighter 2. He loved showing off, he wore his signature red gi, and kept his long blonde hair tied back like a rock star. But beneath the swag, Ken still trained harder than ever. Why? Because he wanted to keep up with Ryu. He didn't want to be left behind, and their friendship pushed both of them to become better fighters. So in Alpha, players saw Ken wasn't just a brash American, he was loyal, competitive, and determined to match Ryu's skill. And one thing to add on to Ken, if you ever watch the Street Fighter 2 movie anime, it actually shows a part in there. And that movie, I'm telling you, that is a beautiful watch. Definitely, if you've never seen that before, check it out. But there's a part in there that shows where Ryu got his red headband from. So they cover a lot of historic parts with Alpha. They kind of go back in time. So yeah, but that's kind of where Ryu gets his headband. Next up, we got Chun-Li, and at this time, she's a rookie investigator on a mission. Now Chun was already a fan favorite in Street Fighter 2, famous for her lightning fast kicks and strong spirit. But Alpha showed a younger Chun, just starting her mission to find the people responsible for her father's death. In the game's story, she was investigating the criminal organization Shadaloo, led by the evil M. Bison, in America anyway, Vega in Japan, and she wasn't yet the seasoned Interpol agent fans knew. Instead, she was driven by revenge, determined to uncover the truth, even if it put her life in danger. And this made her character richer and more relatable. Players got to see why she was so serious and about justice in the later games. Not to mention they changed up her look and gave her a nice spandex suit. No complaints there. And then there was M. Bison, the ruthless mastermind. And Bison in this game definitely is the main villain, and in Street Fighter Alpha, Bison was at the height of his power. He was building up Shadaloo, recruiting deadly fighters, assassins, and anyone who could help him control the world. And this was our first introduction to Psycho Power. In the original Street Fighter 2, he did some amazing stuff, but we were kind of like, okay, maybe that's just a last boss thing. It really didn't talk about Psycho Power. This is our first time and moving forward into the Street Fighter universe that we will see Psycho Power and how Bison achieves it, and we will see that this dude is not just a generic boss at the end of the game, but he is definitely an evil overlord. Just a cool character all the way around. And Bison's recruitment of the new warriors in Alpha made this a perfect place for Capcom to introduce the new characters and expand their roster in exciting ways. So we'll cover some more of the characters. Then we got Charlie Nash, and Charlie Nash is a newcomer in Alpha 1, but hugely important to the lore. He's a military officer with cool sunglasses and a calm professional vibe. And he's Guile's best friend and mentor. His Sonic Boom and Flash Kick moves are similar to Guile's but have unique animations and timing. In the story, Charlie eventually sacrifices himself to stop M. Bison, and this makes him a tragic hero that fans love and respect. Now, I wouldn't really call it a sacrifice. I'd say he got okie doped. You know, if you ever played the game before, in the story, Charlie eventually tracks down Bison, defeating him, but then he falls for the okie dope. And tragically, Charlie is no more. So that tragedy makes him a hero that fans love and respect. Next up, we got Guy, and he's very familiar. He's a modern ninja from Capcom's Final Fight series. He's fast, disciplined, and very stylish. Alpha 1 gave him chain combos that made full use of the new combo system. Players who mastered him could do huge, flashy combos that felt amazing. And Guy's design mixes street brawling toughness with ninja tradition, making him a standout as a cool, justice-driven character. Then we got Sodom. Now, Sodom is another Final Fight veteran, and he's a big American obsessed with Japanese samurai culture, even though he's not Japanese at all. He wears samurai armor and fights with twin sais, or jite. The stage is filled with Japanese banners and props showing his intense dedication to his hobby. Now, he's kind of a comic relief character in some ways, and it's funny but makes him memorable. Despite his weird obsession though, he is a powerful grappler with strong throws and armored attacks. Then we got Birdie, and Birdie's a returning character from the original Street Fighter, but redesigned for Alpha 1. He's a massive punk with a spiky mohawk, chains, and lethal throws. He's raw, undefined, fights dirty with a big chain, and his grappling style added variety to the roster, letting players bully opponents at close range. So Capcom's redesign with Birdie more colorful and fun, showing how they could update even old forgotten characters into something new. And while we're at it, another returning Street Fighter 1 character was Adon, a Muay Thai master from Thailand. And he's Sagat's former student, but has a big ego and wants to prove he's better than Sagat. He's fast, aggressive, and hits hard with Muay Thai kicks and elbow strikes. His arrogance makes him a natural rival to disciplined fighters like Ryu. Adon, in my opinion, was cheap, but they kind of toned him down for this version. Still keeps his flashy moves and taunts, and that made him very popular with players who wanted a cocky, stylish character. Then we got Rose, and Rose is a mysterious fortune teller new to the series from Italy who uses soul power, a mystical energy opposite to M. Bison's psycho power. She has a very elegant design, and she's powerful, she has unique moves, and stand out as a sophisticated, dramatic counter to M. Bison's brutal style. And then we got a returning character, Sagat, and he's a towering Muay Thai emperor, and this version Sagat probably looks the best, and this palette of Sagat will go on to be in future Alpha games and even some of the CVS games. Now, he was the final boss in the original Street Fighter and Ryu's fiercest rival. In Alpha 1, Sagat is dealing with his defeat at Ryu's hands. Now, we gotta remember, this is before Street Fighter 2, so at this point, he's scarred both physically with his famous chest scar and mentally. Also this time around, he's more thoughtful, seeking revenge, but also has a new respect for Ryu. So in this game, he uses devastating tiger shots and tiger uppercuts to control the fight. Sagat is powerful, disciplined, and dangerous, making him a classic anti-hero who balances pride with honor. And then also not shown on the original screen of the roster, there are some hidden secret characters. We'll talk about the characters real quick, and later we'll go over how to unlock these guys. So next up, we got the appearance of a Street Fighter character that will go on to be lovable and pretty much a mainstay of most Street Fighter games. We're talking about Dan Hibiki, and Dan is a joke character of the game, but also one of its most beloved. At the time, he was Capcom poking fun at rival companies, fighting games by making him deliberately over the top and weak. Ryo and Robert from Art of Fighting. And that's a story for another time, but that was Capcom's rival at the time. So to take a cheap shot at SNK and make fun of him, they create this character. And Dan's story is that he wants revenge on Sagat for killing his father. But unlike Ryu and Ken, he's not disciplined or serious. He's loud and not very skilled. He has a Godoken and a tiny fireball that barely goes anywhere, and his Shoryuken is hilariously bad. But that's what makes him fun, and kind of a challenge to win with. Beating someone but Dan was a badge of honor for skilled players. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, Dan would go on to suck in later versions of the games, iterations of Street Fighter, but in Street Fighter Alpha 1, Dan was actually pretty good. I mean, he was strong, powerful, and his moves actually, while they were limiting, people actually figured out the game and kind of made Dan probably one of the better characters in the game. Now, if we move forward, Alpha 2, Alpha 3, he wouldn't, to me personally, be really good again until maybe like Street Fighter 4, he was manageable, my opinion. And then also in Street Fighter 5, he was actually pretty fun and pretty good. So will we see Dan again in Street Fighter 6? Who knows? I'll be surprised if they don't put him back in there, because believe it or not, Dan actually has a big following. And another hidden character was Akuma, Goki in Japan. Now Akuma, we saw him in Super Street Fighter Turbo, and Akuma is the ultimate secret boss, feared and legendary. He's Ryu and Ken's dark counterpart, having fully embraced the deadly Satsu no Hado. He's quiet, doesn't say too much, and very menacing, with glowing eyes and a red gi. And his moves are devastating. It shuns Goku Satsu, Raging Demon, and can end a round quickly if it connects. Akuma's appearance in Alpha 1 was shocking. He's much stronger than the other characters with fast, brutal combos, and he represents what Ryu fears he could become if he gives into anger and violence. Now, Akuma in this game, like most games, he's busted. He's not as bad as Super Turbo Akuma, but he's still busted in this game. But over time, they would kind of, Akuma's good in every game. His probably weakest incarnation, in my opinion, is probably Street Fighter 3, or Third Strike, I should say. Not Street Fighter 3, the original, but he was in Street Fighter 3 Double Impact and Third Strike. Akuma is still good in Third Strike. He's just not top tier or broken like he is in other games. But Street Fighter 4 Vanilla, he was broken. Street Fighter 4 AE 2012, Super Street Fighter, he was busted and broken there too. But I mean, he was just top tier. I shouldn't say broken in Street Fighter 4. I'd say top tier. But so Akuma's has a history of just always being just really good in any game he's in. I mean, just with his tool set. I mean, it's hard for Akuma not to be good. So let's talk about the new timeline and more personality this game brings. Now, before Alpha came out, Street Fighter 2 was fun, but the characters were a lot simpler. You picked your fighter and battled around the world with only a few lines of story. But Street Fighter Alpha changed that. They added lore, personality, and backstory. Players could actually see their favorite characters grow and change into what we know they will become later on. And then with the refreshing introduction of new characters like Charlie, Rose, and Dan, making the world feel bigger and more alive. So Capcom's decision to make Alpha a prequel was a turning point. It showed that fighting games didn't have to be shallow or mindless. They could have rich stories, emotional struggles, and complex relationships. And fans loved it. And the success influenced future Street Fighter games. And the Alpha series gave Street Fighter its heart, turning a simple arcade brawler into a saga that fans still celebrate today. And to pull more on those heartstrings, the cast told a story. Classic heroes like Ryu and Ken stayed true to their series' roots. Newcomers like Charlie and Rose added emotion and tragedy in the storyline. And then they revived old faces like Birdie, Sodom, which showed Capcom's creativity. And also secret bosses like Akuma, Dan, and Bison added mystery excitement to the game. And then you had the comic relief like Dan, which he was supposed to be anyway, so the developers had a sense of humor. Now let's jump into the gameplay. When Capcom released Street Fighter Alpha, they didn't just give players prettier graphics and cooler characters, they completely gutted and changed the way the game played. It wasn't just about mashing buttons or throwing fireballs anymore. Capcom wanted to create something fresh that both old fans and new players could enjoy. So let's take a look at the big new gameplay changes that Street Fighter Alpha brought to the table. First up, you had the Super Combo gauge. Now, this idea actually started back in Super Turbo, but Capcom made it better in Alpha. So you had a big colorful bar at the bottom of your screen, and every time you attacked, blocked, or even took damage, that bar filled up hit by hit. And when it was full, you could do a super combo. A flashy, and also with this game, as Turbo played, you only had one super move per character. But Alpha gave each character at least 2 super combos, and sometimes even 3. So it was a flashy, powerful move that did lots of damage. And it wasn't just for show. It added strategy. Now, one thing to note with Super Turbo, when you use your super meter, use the whole meter. In alpha, you had 3 layers of the meter. You had levels 1, 2, and 3. So most people would change and say, oh, I'm gonna do a level 1, I'm a level 2. When you hear that terminology, it means how much of the bar they're gonna use. Now, the higher the bar, obviously, the more damage it does. But that bar is also used for something else. And that new element is alpha counters. Now, this was a completely new and exclusive to the alpha series at the time. Normally, if you were blocking an opponent's attacks, you'd have to sit there, eat it, and just take the pressure. But Capcom changed that with alpha counters. And here's how it worked. While blocking, you could spend some of your super gauge meter to immediately counterattack. So instead of being stuck in defense forever, you could break out and push your opponent away. Now, this was huge at the time because so if you were like a turtle and you had like pressure on you, you could actually, it was kind of like a get off me move. Now, you could actually miss the alpha counter, but generally if you timed it well, you could actually get a reversal. And it was kind of hard to negate that once somebody did alpha counter. So basically you'd be blocking and then all of a sudden, and it cost you 1 meter gauge. So if you had 3 meters, you could do it. If you had 1 meter, you could do it, but you could only use it. It wasn't you could do it every time. You have to have meter to actually do it. So, and some of them have some pretty cool ones. That noise it make, and they spin like that. And also the animation when you could hit with alpha counter was pretty cool because the person would go like to this like spinning animation. So alpha counters were a big deal, and it definitely opened up the meta at the time. And then you had chain combos, and these features made alpha feel much faster and more fun. In older Street Fighter games, combos were kind of tricky because we have to remember in the original Street Fighter 2, there were no combos. It was just kind of it was just a programming glitch. And they would introduce combos in later games like Super Turbo and Super Street Fighter 2. But originally, combos weren't a thing. It was something the players had made up and discovered. But Alpha introduced chain combos, and you could actually link series of light attacks into stronger ones in a smooth sequence. And it felt fluid and natural at the time. So even newcomers could pull off a stylish combo without needing years of practice. And this system lowered the barrier for entry while still rewarding advanced players who could mix up their attacks creatively. And it made Alpha a more approachable game without losing its competitive edge. Or so they thought anyway. So basically the way the combos worked were, you could pretty much almost link anything together and you can get a full sequence of the combo. So you could do jab, jab, medium into heavy, or jab, jab into heavy sometimes. So the combos definitely helped out with the game, and they did scale them at the time. So yeah, you could do more combos and get more hits, but they actually did kind of implement the scaling factor. So while long combos did good damage, certain combos were actually scaled, but that wasn't always true in later iterations of this game. But for the most part, they did try to scale it a little bit. So and another big feature was air blocking. So this was truly something new for Street Fighter fans. So in the past, if you jumped and your opponent attacked, you were stuck. You got anti-aired every time. This means jumping was always risky. So Alpha introduced air blocking, which let you block back attacks even while airborne. And this added a whole layer of strategy. Players could jump. Players had a better chance to jump in more safely, but had to watch for attacks that were designed to be air blocks. So it didn't make you invincible, but at the same time, it helped out greatly for minor attacks and could get you over a fireball with a lot less risk as opposed to getting anti-aired. So bringing it all together, all these new systems weren't just gimmicks. They worked together to make Street Fighter Alpha feel fresh, exciting, and up to modern speed. The super combo gauge rewarded smarter meter use, alpha counters let defenders fight back, and chain combos made moves feel stylish and fast, even to newcomers. The air blocking turned jumps into a strategic mind game. And Capcom wanted to make a game that hardcore fighting fans could master, but the new players could also enjoy. By adding these new gameplay systems, it gave everyone tools to be creative and experiment. So let's talk about the audio and music. Now, when you stepped into an arcade in the 90s, you didn't just see flashing lights and crowds of excited players, you could actually hear it. And one of the main things with an arcade game is the sound. It pulls you in right away. And for Capcom's fighting games, especially this one, the music and audio were a huge part of what made the experience unforgettable. A lot of the times they made remixes of classic Street Fighter 2 music that fans already loved. And these remixes felt fresh and modern, but still had familiar melodies that players remembered. And this was very brilliant to give you that bridge from familiarity with the music but still give it a fresh new sound. This way, older fans that recognized Street Fighter 2 got that nostalgic feeling, while new players got excited by the updated sound. And the tracks themselves were fast-paced and energetic. And the sound design went beyond the music. Capcom improved voice samples as well, making them cleaner and more expressive, so you can actually understand what your character was saying. So this time around, when Ryu yelled Hadouken or Shoryuken, you didn't have to guess what he was trying to say. You could actually hear it. It was sharp and dramatic. Another big part of it was the redesign of the arcade machine. I mean, this would be, you have the Street Fighter Super machines, the big blue machines, but you also had these alpha machines. And with this music, I mean, OST for Street Fighter Alpha to me is still a classic to this day because they actually stepped up the music big time with the CPS2 hardware, and you were able to hear them out of those big blue speakers. When I say big blue, I mean the big blue machine, the actual Capcom big blue machine as it's called nowadays. But the speakers on that thing was huge, and the control panel was super large, so you had more than enough room to play. It was designed basically for fighting games. That was one of the most beautiful cabinets in my opinion. Also, the only machine I feel like rivals that, and this is my personal opinion, is a 4-slot Neo Geo arcade machine. If you've ever seen a 4-slot, those things are huge, but that one and the Big Blue are probably my favorite arcade machines. Stand-up machines, sit-down machines, that's a different, the Vulix is probably my favorite, but if you're talking about stand-ups from the old school, I would definitely say the Big Blue and the 4-slot MVS Neo Geo. So in the end, the audio and music weren't just background features, they were central to building the game's unforgettable atmosphere. So let's talk about the release and arcade impact. So the game released in June of 1995. It hit arcades all around the world. It was an exciting moment for both arcade owners and fighting game fans. And one of the key features that made the CPS2 cool was, and arcade operators were actually thrilled because Street Fighter Alpha used Capcom's existing CPS2 arcade boards. That meant they didn't have to buy a whole new machine from scratch. Instead, they could just swap out the board inside the cabinet, and this saved them a lot of money and made it easy to upgrade. Because of this, many arcades quickly added Street Fighter Alpha to their lineup. So when players first saw the game, they were blown away. I mean, myself included. The game's graphics were amazing for the time, and the characters were drawn in a new anime style that hadn't been seen before, with the exception of Darkstalkers. And with the impressive sound, music tracks, helping build the hype during matches, the voice samples, the characters, the overall presentation made players feel like they were getting something new and premium. Now, with all that said though, Street Fighter Alpha to me is a great game, but it wasn't perfect. It did have some problems, so we'll go ahead and get into that real quick. So the roster at the time was pretty small, with only a handful of fighters to choose from. I mean, you had the classics in there, and you did have a few, but I mean, compared to some of the other games out there, the roster could, especially SNK games, the roster could feel a little limited. And the biggest killer, the Achilles heel for Street Fighter, in my opinion, was the balance issue. I mean, this game was busted. I mean, some characters had clear advantages over others. I mean, it was like a 10-1 matchup for the most part. And players quickly figured out which players were stronger and which ones were weaker, and they kind of shooed away from them. And this led to some of the frustration and competitive play. I mean, Street Fighter Alpha 1, to me, it was a small window of competitive play for Street Fighter Alpha 1. Fun game, something to mess around with. Even by today's standards, people say, oh yeah, play some Street Fighter Alpha 1, but generally the most competitive that's still played today, and at the time was when Street Fighter Alpha 2 came out. That one probably had the most competitive play and had most memorable moments. Now, Alpha 3 did have a competitive life at one time, but in modern times, if you're an OG of OG fighting games and you actually watch some of the throwback tournaments or just some of the older games they play at these new tournaments, they call them old man games. Street Fighter, out of the Alpha series, Street Fighter Alpha 2 is probably going to be the game of choice. They had, and that's a video for another time if you play Alpha 2, but Alpha 2 probably had the longest competitive shelf life out of the Alpha series. But despite its imperfections, Street Fighter Alpha was a hit in the arcades, and it brought back the competitive spirit of the original Street Fighter 2 craze, even though the game was broken. Now, Street Fighter Alpha did have some cool secrets at the time. If you ever highlight the random select button, you can see, if you look hard enough, you don't gotta look that hard, but you'll see Bison scale through sometimes, Akuma and Dan. And originally, when the game first came out, people didn't know the code to unlock these characters, so they would just mash the button and pray that they would get one of the hidden characters, whether it be Akuma, Bison, or Dan. But there is a way you can actually pick them every time. So we'll go over it real quick. I'll just explain to you real fast. And that way, and it depends on which version you play. If you play the home version or you play the arcade version, they are a little different, but we'll go over it real quick. So first up, how to pick Akuma, or Goki in Japan. You gotta put the cursor on the random select box on your side, hold start, and then press player 1 down, 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 left, 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 then press jab and fierce buttons at the same time, or shorten roundhouse if you want a different color. And the player 2 side is just the opposite, down, 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 right, 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 and then press jab and fierce. Next up, to play as Dan. His is pretty simple. Put the cursor on the random select box on your side and hold start, then press jab, short, forward, roundhouse, fierce, strong, and you'll get Dan. And lastly, play as in Bison. Put the cursor on the random select box on your side and then hold start, then press down, down, left, left, down, left, left, and then press jab and fierce, or shorten roundhouse for alternating colors. Now, beyond the characters, there's actually something even cooler in my opinion. Well, let's be real. I do appreciate the characters being playable, but something equally as good that was super fun that they didn't have to put in there. And it refers highly to that anime I was telling you about, Street Fighter 2, the movie in Japan. And they took it straight out of the movie and put it into the game, which I just, at the time, blew me away when I saw somebody do it. Because at the time, yeah, there were like magazines and stuff for the home version, but the arcade, it was still kind of undiscovered. So first up, you could fight Akuma. And you can only fight Akuma on the first stage. So you can't play through the game and then fight Akuma at the end. You basically have to fight him on the first stage. And basically what you did was, and you pilot the character you want to play during the first fight, press and hold down start, strong, forward, and wait for Akuma. Now, once you fight Akuma here, you only get one match against Akuma. Now, once you fight Akuma, if you beat him, you don't continue on with the rest of the game. The game shuts down and you're treated to the ending. Now, the biggest surprise to me was the dramatic battle. And this would be the first, they would incorporate this in later games and home versions, but this was the first one that actually had a legit dramatic battle. And what I mean is, basically you had Ryu and Ken versus Bison, but the catch was player 1 controlled Ryu and player 2 controlled Ken. So you had independently moving, you both could play at the same time against an AI computer. And it was super cool at the time because they took that straight out the movie. If you ever watched the Street Fighter anime movie, you know that at the end, it's Ryu and Ken versus Bison. And it was probably one of the most epic fights in that whole movie. Well, I don't know. I did appreciate the Ryu and Fei Long fight, but I'm getting off topic here, but definitely watch that movie. But anyway, so let's talk about how to do that. So for the dramatic battle, you have to have 2 people join the game. Player 1 should be Ryu and player 2 should be Ken. Both players should hold start, press up, and then release start. Player 1 press up, and jab. Player 2 press up, and fierce. And then the dramatic battle will start. And this, again, also with this one, you only have the one match, and after it's over, and after the match is over, you get to see the credits roll. But that was definitely worth a token back in the day because you only get a short gameplay, but for what you get, if you just want to see that, that's totally awesome. So that was probably one of the best things because I love the anime. I watched it over and over. So that was just huge that they implement that into the game. So let's talk about real quick some of the home versions, bringing the arcade home. So let's be real. Back in the day, everybody couldn't go to the arcade every day. Some people lived too far away and others didn't have the money to keep feeding cords into the machine. So Capcom knew they needed to find a way to bring Street Fighter Alpha experience home to these players. So they got to work on making home versions of the game that could run on popular consoles at the time. First up, and probably the most famous port, was the PlayStation. Now, the PlayStation was close to arcade perfect. At the time, the PlayStation was a brand new, powerful machine that could handle 2D fighting games pretty well. Capcom worked hard to make sure the PlayStation version of Street Fighter Alpha looked and felt almost exactly like the arcade. So Street Fighter Alpha for the PlayStation, to me, I remember getting this game. I didn't buy it right away because at the time, I didn't even own a PlayStation. I rented. You can go to, back in the day, you can go to Blockbuster Video and they could rent, you had to put down a $100 deposit. And you could actually rent the PlayStation 1 console. Blockbuster Video did this back in the day. And because at the time, I was in the military, we were spending money on other stupid stuff. But, I didn't buy a PlayStation right away. So we rent the PlayStation over the weekend, we get a few, drinks or whatever, hang out and just play some PlayStation. So we rent different games. And Alpha 1 was definitely one of the ones I rented. And it was cool because you'd rent it and then you'd play it for like over the weekend, try to beat it with all the characters. And for me, at the time, it was the closest thing to arcade perfect. Now, you did have a lot of load times in Alpha 1, and there were some animations missing. But at the time, that was arcade perfect, in my opinion. Obviously it wasn't, but to an average person playing the game that loved Alpha so much in arcade, it was arcade perfect. Your combos still work, the endings were there, and believe it or not, my opinion, I feel like when they put the arcade games on, even Neo Geo games that came out for the PlayStation and Sega Saturn at the time, the music sounded, because it was actual CD, for the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. So you actually got CD quality music as opposed to what you got in the arcade. So you actually had the arcade music, but then you had remixes on the PlayStation 1 and Saturn versions. And to me, they sounded better than the actual arcade did. It was just, the music was much better on the home version. So that was a big win there too. So you had the superior music and sound at home, but you were missing some of the animations and you added load times. But overall, a very good port for the PlayStation 1. And next up, we had a Sega Saturn, and the Saturn was famous for being great at 2D games, not just good like the PlayStation, but great. I mean, it had special hardware that made it easier to handle lots of animations of frames and detailed sprites. I mean, under the hood, Saturn was definitely superior to the PS1. The Saturn version to me was probably definitely the definitive version to play at home because it cut a lot of the load times. A lot of animations were not missing from the Saturn version, and the Saturn was just under the hood of both consoles, Saturn and PlayStation. The Saturn definitely dominated the PlayStation as far as hardware. But so yeah, overall, the PlayStation, the Sega Saturn version to me was just like, and to a lot of other people at the time, was just the ultimate home conversion of the game. You were actually literally playing the arcade at home. And what's cool about that as well, what made home consoles so great was the fact that you could actually, they were so close that you could actually practice at home on a Saturn or a PS1 even if you had that, and then go to the arcade and dominate. Now, it was hard to find a stick, you know, and that kind of hurt people back then. Now, when I play fighting games, it's kind of off topic, I prefer to play with a stick, but I can play with a controller as well, because during that time in the arcade, you played with a stick. There was no, you can't, not like today, you can plug a USB-C into the arcade machine. No, back then it was just the sticks. You had to get good on the sticks. And once you mastered that, the home version might have felt funny trying to play with 6 buttons, but my experience came from playing Super Nintendo version of Street Fighter 2. So I got good with playing on a controller, putting my using the shoulder buttons and everything. So it carried over well for the PlayStation and the Saturn, especially Saturn had a 6-button pad, so that made it that much better as well. So that was a kind of a barrier right there. If you played in an arcade on the sticks, it could be hard to do movements like 360 movements or anything on the control pad. But even still, I mean, at home, you can still practice these combos, and your muscle memory might be a little off, but you can go to the arcade and still dominate. If you were one of those guys into frame data, I mean, at that time, let's be real, frame data and stuff, while it was in the game, nobody really knew what it was. Nobody was really counting. You just knew, I got hit with this, I blocked this, I can punish that. You weren't counting frames back then. I mean, if you were, kudos to you, because you probably were the only one doing it. So it was kind of like, you throw out an attack, it whiffs or something, you could punish and stuff like that, play footsies. You could play footsies back then, but people weren't thinking about frame data. Now, I'm gonna go back to Alpha because I'm getting off topic with a whole nother layer of FGC stuff, and so this is about Alpha. So let's get back to Alpha. So with the wildly successful version of the Saturn, finally, Capcom even went small with the Game Boy Color version. That was a wild simplified version, but you know, it was there. And this one was a bit of a surprise. The Game Boy Color was much less powerful than the PlayStation or Saturn. It had a tiny screen, limited colors, and much simpler hardware. But Capcom wanted Street Fighter Alpha to be everywhere, even in people's pockets. So they made a version for the Game Boy Color that was, frankly, in my opinion, kind of wild. The graphics were super simplified with teeny chibi style characters, and the backgrounds were way simplified than other versions. And many of the moves had to be removed or made simple. And the Game Boy only had 2 face buttons, so special attacks were easy to do, but also a lot less complex. But despite the limitations, it was still impressive that they even tried it. You know, for many kids who didn't own a PlayStation or Saturn, because that was a lot of money back then, the Game Boy Color version was their first taste of Street Fighter Alpha. Even if it was a very different experience, it let them carry the game around in their pocket and battle friends on the bus, at school, or whatever you're gonna do. So Street Fighter Alpha definitely left a lasting legacy. I mean, the different home versions helped Street Fighter Alpha find a whole new audience outside of arcades, and that's what made it blow up. I mean, arcade was cool, but the home versions were so close that basically you played it at home, you played it in the arcade, in my opinion. And people practiced at home and then went to the arcades to show off their skills. Friends could battle each other without spending a crap ton of money. You buy the game one time and now you're playing Alpha whenever you want. And this helped Street Fighter Alpha become even more popular and ensured it would be remembered for years to come. So basically, and also Street Fighter 1 was just the beginning of something much bigger. Even though Alpha 1 was fun and exciting, the team at Capcom knew they could do even better. They listened to the players about the balance issues and wanting more characters. So when Street Fighter Alpha 2 came out in 1996, it felt like a huge leap forward. More characters to choose from, more balance, and new mechanics. But Capcom didn't stop there. In 1998, they released Street Fighter Alpha 3, and it was even more ambitious. Alpha 3 was famous for having one of the biggest casts of any 2D fighting game at the time. Old favorites returned, including all the old characters from the past, brand new faces, and more secrets to unlock, giving players tons of choices and keeping battles fresh and unpredictable. But we'll go over Street Fighter Alpha 2 and Street Fighter Alpha 3 respectively in another video at a later date, because those games are so huge, they definitely need their own video. So with that, what are my thoughts on Street Fighter Alpha 1? Alpha 1 to me was a turning point in Street Fighter history. I mean, I played all the ones before, was pretty good at them, and Alpha, I remember my first time seeing Alpha. There was an arcade in North Carolina, right by Fort Bragg, and it was called, I want to say Putt Putt Golf or something to that effect. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but that's where you went where all the cool games. You had the mall, but the mall was kind of whatever. But this place was actual, had miniature golf and arcade in it. Anyway, that's where I saw Street Fighter Alpha for the first time. And I remember coming in, because it wasn't like, I didn't read the magazines, you know, and hear about, I just happened to walk in and see it. And at the time, this one kid, he kept beating me over and over. I mean, it was so bad because I had better footsies and I had better gameplay than him, but he knew how to do special moves. I had no idea how to do it. And so I get him down injured and he hit me with a special move, Alpha Counter. He knew the mechanics of the game. I had better fundamentals, but he knew all the mechanics. This was my first time playing. And he beat me. Back in the day, if you went to an old arcade, you could put like $5 in the token machine and sometimes give you $6 worth of tokens. He beat me a whole, I called it a special. That's what we called it back in the day. Somebody had a pocket police say, yo, he got a special. Well, anyway, he beat me a whole pocket full of those $6 worth of arcade, $6 worth of tokens. And I was so pissed off because Street Fighter 2 was my game, you know, and to get beaten by this guy over and over, when you're so close, you take a round, but just keep getting beat. And he left me there pondering after he beat me up, and I didn't run out of money. I just stopped playing because I got tired of getting my ass beat by him. But it was just a thing where it just built the competitive edge. So, and I was so blown away with the colors, the new characters, the sound, the big blue machine. Street Fighter Alpha 1 definitely had a huge impact. And then the fact that you could, when you go to Blockbuster, you could rent it at home and you got virtually the exact same thing on a PlayStation, minus the load times. But back in the day, we didn't care about load times. We're getting ready to play some Street Fighter or whatever game we're going to play. Load times, you knew that just came with the territory. So definitely a huge impact and paved the way for a lot of games that will come later. Alpha 2, Alpha 3, even the same sprites being used in the Marvel crossover games or Capcom crossovers, whatever you want to call them. And then even some of the sprites even still piggybacking off in CVS 2 games, CVS 1, CVS 2. Sagat probably being the most famous. Everybody else kind of gets a touch up, but Sagat, for some reason, alpha sprites of Sagat, he's in every game and he always looks like that. So yeah, kudos to Alpha 1, definitely a game changer at the time. So, but let me know in the comments what your first experience with Alpha 1 is. Did you love it? Were you surprised? Did it suck? And that's another thing to talk about Alpha 1. The competitiveness of Alpha 1, it was, the game was busted, it was broken because it was their first attempt. And most games like that are, if you want to talk about the original Street Fighter 2, it's broken, it's busted. And then with balance patches, and even with multiple balance patches like Super Turbo, that game is busted. I mean, it's just people have come to accept it and it's a part of the game's charm. But if you never played like Super Turbo, expect to get your ass handed to you by not even gonna be a veteran player, just somebody who understands the game, because there's so much cheap, broken stuff in that game, especially that is still being explored 20 something years later. But Alpha 1, same thing. Nobody plays Alpha 1 competitively. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find an Alpha 1 tournament, even more hard pressed to find footage. But yeah, it was a short window for Alpha 1. So, but I can talk about Street Fighter all day. So that's gonna end it for this video, guys. Let me know in the comments your experience. And with that, as always, take care of yourself, protect your peace. God bless you. Catch you next video. Thanks for watching.